G'day and welcome to another video with Better Pics. Hope this finds everyone well. As many of you would be aware, Adobe's made a number of updates to their software lately, and there's been quite a few big updates to both Adobe Camera Raw and also Lightroom. You may have seen my video the other day around the updates to Adobe Camera Raw. So if not, there's a link below where you'll be able to check that out. So today I just wanted to create a video around the updates with Lightroom. And there are a number of updates, so this may take a little bit longer, but hopefully you'll see some value out of it. And as always, if there's any questions, please don't hesitate to pop them below. And yeah, let's get into it. The first lot of updates that I wanted to go through are really around the speed and performance of Lightroom. This is, of course, going to be dependent on your individual systems, and what I display may not be the benchmark for how much quicker Lightroom works. In fact, more than likely there's going to be systems that are faster than mine, and there's going to be systems that are slower than mine. So it really just does come down to, I guess, individual experience. And how powerful your computer system is set up. But one of the things is, what I should say also is, I think any performance or speed improvements with Lightroom is something that's going to be greatly welcomed, because it has been an issue in the past that's been discussed quite a bit on forums and on social media, that there are some speed issues. So certainly anything that helps that workflow move a little bit quicker, I think, is a good thing. So even just down to scrolling seems to be happening quicker, which, obviously with the images that I have here, there's not a huge number of images, but if you're working on, thousands of images, which is not unusual for commercial shooters as well as travel photographers. I think when I came back from Antarctica, I had almost 15,000 images that were shot in 3 weeks, and I could have quite easily and happily shot double that without too much issue. But it's certainly easy, or it certainly helps if you've got some speed improvement with even the basics like scrolling when you're working with a whole bunch of images. Moving over to the develop module, now I've actually removed all of the develop settings out of the images. I've just freshly imported them back into the new version of Lightroom. So one of the other improvements that we've seen is that when you're making, as you can see, we have the main preview here in the develop module. We have a thumbnail on the left hand side, and we've also got the thumbnail down the bottom. When you're making adjustments to your image, you can see I'm just doing a bit of an extreme exposure drop. You can see that the only image that's now being updated is the main image. The two thumbnails, so the one on the left and one at the bottom, are not being updated, and that is, I believe, to just help with the speed of rather than having to update 3 images, it's only updating one at a time, of course. Now I'm clicking and dragging that slider. As soon as I let go, you can see the other 2 thumbnails update. And again, if I do a second adjustment to overexpose, again, the main image is updating in real time, but the other 2 thumbnails are not. Once I let go, then they do update. So that, I think, is just an attempt to have Lightroom work a little bit quicker, and certainly it is updating for me when I'm making those adjustments in real time much quicker. So seems to have worked. So hopefully you'll see those improvements as well. So you'll notice that there's a little icon up on the top right hand side in the shape of a cloud. And if you click on that, you can see that it's just access to your cloud storage and an identifier of how much is being used. Now, I don't actually use cloud storage with Adobe, which is why you can see that it's there's nothing in there. And obviously you've got the start syncing and the preference tab there as well, or preference link. So yeah, that just gives you access to a bit of information around how you're going with your cloud storage. And you'll also notice over here on the right hand side that there's a different logo as well, like Lightroom Classic over on the left hand side at the top there. And yeah, that's new as well. All right. So under the adjustment brush, you'll see that a lot of the or pretty much the layout of the adjustment brush is exactly the same as it was before, but the same with Adobe Camera Raw, where we now have a hue adjustment. So you can paint in hue adjustments, essentially with your adjustment brush, as well as your radial filter and graduated filter as well. And this is a really welcome feature by a lot of people. So, for example, if I make some adjustments there and I click and drag, you can see that I'm able to change the hue of that specific part of the image, as opposed to traditionally with hue adjustments, which would be under the hue, saturation and luminance tabs. You would only be able to make those adjustments to the entire image. Now, this is a great feature not only for people like myself who are travel photographers, where you may want to make specific hue adjustments to only specific areas of the image, but for commercial photographers as well, where color of product is super critical. So it's really important to make sure that the product that you're representing visually is accurate color. So being able to make fine hue adjustments to specific parts of the image is a really good feature. Keeping in mind that it also has the use fine adjustment option as well, where when you have that clicked, you can see that the click and drag is much slower, and you can make finer adjustments without and finer and more accurate adjustments, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So for big adjustments, unclick that and you can see it moves super quickly. For fine adjustments, just click on that little checkbox and you can see that it moves in smaller increments. Excellent. All right, we're just going to get rid of that that adjustment brush adjustment there. Now you'll notice as well that you also have the option to expand all, show all, and solo mode. So you can see with the tabs under the normal develop module that you can have solo mode, expand all, or show all. I tend to go, because I predominantly work with a laptop screen when I'm away from home, I tend to go with solo mode just because I want to only work on one tab at a time. So if I click onto a different tab, the previous tab closes up. So I just find that really useful and much quicker, and I find that I have to do less scrolling to go to specific tabs. So if you're in develop module, over those tabs, if you just right click, you can select solo mode, or if you want to go with expand all or show all, then you have those options as well. But certainly for a smaller screen, I find the solo mode to be really handy and useful. So if we head up to tone curve, you can see that we've got a few extra options there as well. So the parametric curve is still there as an option. We also have the point curve there as well, which for people who use Adobe Camera Raw, that is a more traditional way of creating curves, and just with a little bit of different control. If you double click over any of those points, you do actually remove them. And if you double click over all of them, right up to the last one, then it goes back to the original state as well. But yeah, curves have long been a popular option for creating image edits, and they certainly are a good way to control not only your contrast, but where your highlights, midtones and shadows sit. And definitely worth investigating and learning more about curves, because it can be a really powerful tool, and yeah, useful in your image editing. You can see also we've got red, green and blue, where you can use the curve to make color adjustments as well. Obviously with the opposing colors for each of those color channels, giving you the option to make those color adjustments as you see fit and as is needed for your particular image. So a few changes there with tone curve, and certainly I think some welcome improvements. So moving down to HSL and color, you can see there's a few changes there as well. So rather than it's essentially just the layout that's changed. So rather than scrolling through all of the hues, all of the saturation, all of the levels, you've got each color channel that you can then select and adjust the hue, saturation and luminance. So yeah, just a little bit of a layout change there, and I think that will definitely help just with a little bit more refinement in your workflow, or working on a particular color channel rather than going to hue, adjusting that color channel, then going to saturation, adjusting the same color channel, and so on. I know for me, hue or HSL or hue saturation luminance was always an area of editing that I felt like I had unnecessary clicks, or mouse clicks, and it just felt like a slow process. So so far I've been using this process through Adobe Camera Raw, and I've certainly felt like that the whole process is moving a little bit quicker, which is a good thing. Speaking of colour, the other change that's a fairly significant one, which I think a lot of people will really appreciate, is if you go up to Edit and Preferences or Control Plus, you can see that under Presets, you have control to put in some color profiles specific to your camera. For example, under Presets, the master defaults to Adobe, but if you override, you can see that there's a whole bunch of options around which color presets you want to go with. Now, the color presets that are there at the moment are the ones based on the images that I've imported. So I've used 5D Mark II, 5D Mark III, the FC6310 is from my DJI drone, the Phantom 4 Advanced. Then we've got the Fujifilm X-D2, and we've also got a Panasonic GH5 images in there. So you can see as soon as you import those images, those color profiles are already there. So you can select a 5D Mark III, 5D Mark II, whichever one you want to go for. Now, that's only if you want to override the master setting from the default Adobe for the color. However, if you do select a specific camera and you import an image from a camera that's not already there, it will default back to Adobe, which is a great thing. Now, I tend to keep it at Adobe default, and I've been really happy with the results. However, if you do want to experiment to see what results you get working specifically with a camera's color profile, then certainly give it a go and see what results you get. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Okay, I'm just going to move back to library for this next option. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at some images that have different ISO levels. For example, let's have a look at this option, and I'm just going to put a 5-star rating on that image. It was photographed at ISO 50. Let's have a look at this image, which was photographed at ISO 3200. And let's have a look at this image. And let's have a look at this image, which was photographed at ISO 400. So if we just have a look at star rating, we're going to look at those 3 images. So ISO 400, ISO 3200, and ISO 50. So the next feature, which is really interesting with Lightroom, is you can create a preset that's what's called ISO adaptive. I mentioned this briefly in my Adobe Camera Raw video the other day. And basically what this means is that the preset becomes adaptive depending on what the ISO is of the particular image. For example, you can create, if I jump on this image that was shot at ISO 3200 and swap over to the develop module, we're going to go to detail, which is where our noise reduction is. So for this image, for example, and this is purely for demonstration, this may not be specifically how I would edit this image, but if we put noise reduction at 50 on that particular image, and then if we go to this particular image, which was shot at ISO 50, we're going to leave the noise reduction to 0, and what I'm going to do is select those 2 images, and I'm going to create a preset. Create preset and use a preset. So I'm going to call this ISO sample V1. Now, what you need to make sure is down the bottom here, there's a create ISO adaptive preset. I'm going to make sure that that's checked. And what that means is I'm going to create that. Now, whenever I apply noise reduction to other images, it will adapt the amount of noise reduction depending on the ISO and the grain in the image. Now, if I pop over to this image, which was, as I mentioned earlier, shot at ISO 400, and we go up to develop, and we go to our presets over on the left-hand side here, and we have ISO sample V1. I'm going to click on that preset, and you can see the noise reduction has gone to 25. Now, I didn't set any presets with noise reduction to 25. It's adapted the noise reduction or the ISO, the noise reduction based on the ISO. So you can see there, being at ISO 400, it's made the decision to apply a noise reduction somewhere in between based on the image and the ISO that it was shot at. So that's a great feature. It means that if you're working on a lot of images at various different ISO settings, it means that when you're applying noise reduction, you can actually apply an adaptive or changing amount of noise reduction automatically without having to go through each image individually and change the ISO individually. Now, I know for my commercial and events work, where I may shoot an entire day of images with ISO settings between 1000 and 4000, that's a really handy thing, because the amount of noise reduction that I would apply to the 4000 ISO images would be very different to the amount of noise reduction applied to the 1000 ISO images. So great feature, and definitely worth experimenting with. Obviously, if you find a particular image that stands out that needs a slight refinement, you can still go in and make those noise reduction adjustments as is needed. So certainly a great feature to help speed up your workflow. So the next feature that is really interesting is with the Panorama merge. So you can see I've just got some images here that I photographed in the Everest region in Nepal. If I right click and go to photo merge and then Panorama, fundamentally it's still the same. You can still auto crop and also boundary warp, but one of the new features is fill edges. So we'll go to cylindrical, which is the feature that I normally use, and using a I guess a content aware sort of feature, you can see it's worked really quickly there, and this is quite a massive file, that it's actually filled in those extra edges without needing to crop or warp the image. Now with cropping can work really well, obviously, but you are cropping away pixels, so you are losing a little bit of resolution. And with boundary warp, if you're pushing that boundary warp too hard, it can actually soften the image as well. Whenever you're warping images for whatever reason, it does have an effect on the sharpness of the pixels. And the more you warp those images, the softer they can generally get. Now, fill edges and anything with content aware will obviously and potentially have its limitations as well. It's creating pixels out of nothing based on what the algorithms believe should be there. So keep in mind that depending on the image, in fact with all of your images, if you're using that type of feature, I would strongly recommend closely looking at the results you're getting and making sure that you're happy with them, and if need be, certainly making any adjustments that may help. But it is a great feature to have, because it means, again, that you're not needing to use that boundary warp and potentially softening your images, and you're not needing to crop the image as well, where you're losing resolution. So certainly fantastic feature, and one worth experimenting with to see you're getting the results you want to. If I just click merge there, then yeah, you can see it's creating the panorama, and we'll end up with the panorama there as a DNG. Alright, so you can see I actually already had one stitched there, but it's just created another one as well. So yeah, that looks like a great result. As I said, I would definitely be going through and looking pretty closely at that file, just to make sure that the results that I have achieved I'm happy with, but otherwise all good to go. Alright, the last feature that I want to look at is a new batch export option, where you're able to export different images or with different settings to different locations. And this is a great feature to have included. For my commercial work, whenever I send clients images from events or any sort of commercial shoots, I'll always send them a full resolution image, and I'll send them an image that's web resolution at 1000 pixels on the longest edge. Now that's my default sort of go-to resolution, but a client may specifically request, say, a 1200 pixel longest edge or whatever it may be. The main thing is that I do always send them both the full res and a lower res version. Now, traditionally, what that would mean is that you would, or the way that I would go about it would be to save the images at the full resolution, and then I would do like a batch processing through Photoshop to resize the images to the 1000 pixels on the longest edge. Now with Lightroom, if I just select those images, for example, and so we've got 7 selected images there. If I go to export, I've actually created, as you can see over here on the left hand side, user presets and client high res 5750 pixels, client low res 1000 pixels. So I'm actually able to click both of those, and they will now be exported to 2 separate folders, which as with any preset, you select the folder after you start your export. But you can see by selecting those 2 presets, we now have a tab down on the bottom right hand corner here that says batch export. And those presets that I've created, I've simply created as a normal export. So for example, if I say resize to fit 2000 pixels on the longest edge, I can now click add on the left hand side there, and I'm going to go client low res. This is a new user preset that I'm doing, 2000 pixels. Create, and you can see that's popped up on the left hand side. So I can now select all 3 of those presets and determine exactly where I want them to go, and those images will be saved out to those separate folders. So if I just select those top 2 and hit batch export, it's now going to come up with a dialog box that asks me to specifically choose where I want those images to go. Now I would then go through, choose a folder for the high res, choose a folder for the low res, and click export. Now, as you can see, one feature that is missing, it's grayed out at present, is being able to rename the files on export. Unfortunately, it stays with the file name that the image already has, which is a great feature with Lightroom, being able to rename during the export. Now, the way that I would get around that is it does unfortunately involve extra steps, which would be to go into Bridge to the specific folder where the images have been saved, wait till all of the full resolution thumbnails have been generated, and then batch rename through Bridge. At present, that's the only solution that I can think of to be able to rename all of those files. It's certainly not the best option because, obviously being able to rename during export from Lightroom is a really handy feature because it's kind of a set and forget process. And the process that I've suggested does add extra steps in your workflow, which for me, I don't think is ever ideal. Hopefully this is an update that Adobe will come out with in the future. However, if anybody watching this knows of a solution to be able to rename the files during the export while using the batch export process, then please highlight that process in the comments below, because as yet I haven't been able to find a solution. So I would certainly be very happy to hear from you. So some fantastic new features with Lightroom there. Not only performance, but layout, but also export and editing features as well. Seems Adobe is definitely keen to basically make Lightroom work better, which I think is a really good thing. As I've mentioned many times, when you're working with thousands of images or even hundreds of images, a little micro savings in time can add up to quite a bit of time in the process, and certainly over weeks, months or years during your workflow. So those features are definitely welcomed, and hopefully they will only get better. As always, questions are welcome. Please leave them in the comments below. Thanks for stopping by, and hope to see you again soon. Take care.